Okay. Thank you, everyone. We're going to get started. My name is Mercedes Piedra, and I am one of the directors in the Office for Health Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion here at UC Davis Health in Sacramento, California. Today, we are addressing privilege and anti-Blackness in academic medicine. And to set the tone, I want to play a video for everyone, which I'm going to share my screen to do so. So just give me a moment.
I'm a young black man doing all that I can to stand. Oh, but when I look around and I see what's being done to my kind, every day I'm being hunted as prey. My people don't want no trouble. We've had enough struggle. I just wanna live. God protect me. I just wanna live. I just wanna live.
Was everyone able to hear that video? Just a thumbs up. So in the spirit of anti-racism, anti-Blackness specifically, the Office for Health Equity, Diversity, Inclusion here at UC Davis is committed to being able to address the inequities, the ongoing injustices and legacies that continue to plague us, and specifically for the Black community. To do so, we're hosting a number of sessions such as this, and in the current state, although we have a new president, we know that the historic legacies of our nation are founded in racism. So no matter what president is sitting in that seat, we have a lot of work to do. So I'm thanking my panelists. I'm thanking for all the facilitators that are committed to this work. We're going to be able to talk about mistrust in the community, the needs for change in our research, our education, every possible area, and the barriers preventing us to do so. So to do so, we have a fantastic panel for you today. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Sarah McCullough, who is the Associate Director for the Feminist Research Institute at UC Davis on our main campus. Feminist Research Institute has partnered with our Office for Health Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion to bring this wonderful program to you today. Dr. McCullough, welcome.
Great. Thank you all. I'm so glad you can all be here. I know we still have a lot of people coming into the room. We apologize if you were waiting for a while, and to those who can't hear me yet and are waiting, we're just taking some extra precautions because, as I'm sure you all know, sometimes events like this get unwanted visitors. And we're working hard to make sure that that does not happen so that we can all have a good experience here. Let's see, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. One moment, okay. Great, can you all see that? Get a thumbs up from some folks? Okay, wonderful, thank you so much. So it is so wonderful to see so many people here today. And while we're still getting people in the room, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself and about the Feminist Research Institute, where I work here at UC Davis. The Feminist Research Institute is dedicated to expanding the impact and scope of feminist research within UC Davis and beyond. And one of the specific things that we were asked to do when we were formed was to move insights from the field from the social sciences and humanities, where they're much more prevalent, into other fields as well. Now, by feminist research, I mean, we often think of that, we think just of gender But that also, we think of that in a very intersectional way. So that means we're also thinking about race, class, ability, sexuality, and most broadly, we're thinking about equity and justice in the broadest scope possible. So what we're doing here today and what this is a part of is a broader effort to bring decades of justice-based research coming out of fields like feminist research, ethnic studies, the study of medicine, science, and culture, and bringing those insights to bear on everyday practices, specifically today in academic medicine. And the broad goal really is to give individuals and institutions who have a commitment to social justice more of the intellectual tools to address it, because there's just a wealth of tools in these fields, many of which complement existing practices in the field or existing lived experience and knowledge that people do have working, for example, in academic medicine. So that's part of what this is today. Telling you a bit about myself. I have my PhD in cultural studies, and I do study the relationship between science and culture and medicine. Given today's topic, I want to explicitly address, as many of you might guess, I am not Black. I do not have any lived experience about what it is like to deal with anti-Blackness in an everyday way, which I think is the most important expertise when it comes to this topic. I do identify as Chicana and as a woman of color, but I also recognize that within communities of color, we also have a long history of anti-Blackness, specifically in the Latinx community and including in my own family's history. I'm also not necessarily a medical practitioner, as many of you in this room are, another very important site of expertise. And what I am in, as I said, is an expert on more of the intellectual, the research side of this, and that's what I'll be bringing to this presentation today. What we'll also have is we will have individuals who have the more lived experience speaking to these issues as well. So the next thing I want to do is introduce you to some of the individuals that you will be hearing from today. You already heard from Mercedes, who is our wonderful host. Thank you. You'll also be hearing from Florice Johnson. Florice Johnson is a nurse practitioner manager, and she runs departments that are both inpatient and outpatient and under neuroscience and neurosurgery. She has quite a range of responsibilities, I'm told. And she has been working as a nurse for 30 years and 20 years in an academic setting. So really an immense range of expertise coming from her. Michelle Coe is an assistant professor in public health and public health sciences. And she has done some really impressive research on the continual unequal impacts of our healthcare system on historically oppressed communities. We also have Aaron King, who is an assistant nurse manager and is pursuing a master's in leadership. He's right now finishing up a thesis on microaggressions on graduate student nurses, or graduate nursing students. And he has a dedicated commitment to equity in healthcare and diversity in nursing. And so now I'm going to go ahead and tell you a little bit about our agenda today. We have a first step. We're going to talk about some grounding assumptions. And those will essentially be the things we're not going to question, neither in this discussion, nor in this presentation, nor in the discussion that follows. Then we will examine the cyclical nature of anti-Blackness in academic medicine. We will then have some, and that's when you'll hear from the other presenters as well. We'll have some breakout group discussions after that. Each group will have a facilitator in there. And finally, we'll end with a call to action. Okay, I know that we still are having some folks joining us, and so if you're coming into the room, thank you for making it, and I'll keep getting you up to speed every so often as we do have folks coming in. So grounding assumptions, these are essentially things that we are not going to discuss. These are things that we just assume to be true. If you are not sure about any of these assumptions, we ask that you act as if you hold those true in this space. And if you can't do that, then we invite you to leave before the small group discussion. So you can use this first presentation part as an opportunity to learn, and perhaps after that use as a chance to think about or do some research around these assumptions. So the first assumption we're making is that we are complicit. And what I mean by that is that we live in a culture that is based in racism. We have a long history of racism within our culture. You could say it's literally like in the air we breathe. And so I'm not saying per se like it's our fault or we are racist or believe racist things, but that we just can't really, it's just a part of all of our everyday lives. And thus we all have a responsibility to that. Specifically in this case, academic medicine and medical research are both built on histories of white supremacy. Academic medicine was explicitly made to exclude Black medical professionals, as well as many other medical professionals. Medical research was done literally on the backs and bodies of Black people and Black communities. And this is real. And these legacies are still alive and with us today. While yes, we have IRB processes, we have lots of things that have improved the situation, the challenges that were placed in our histories are still here. And because of this, we all have a responsibility moving forward. The hope is that we all can and must do better. But we do know that this will take time and energy. This will require shifting priorities. And by priorities, I mean not just our time, but also our finances. And it also requires us being uncomfortable. And so that might be something that may happen today. People may in moments feel uncomfortable. That's okay. We move with that. And hopefully we learn and grow. And again, I'll reinforce that if these are principles or assumptions that you don't feel like you can move with in the small group discussions, then we'll just ask that you sign out before we begin that part of the webinar today. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about now is a little introduction to what we might think of as the cyclical process of ongoing inequity, specifically around anti-Blackness. As I've said, the history is a huge part of this. We're always building on what happened before us. We never have a blank slate. And so it's important to acknowledge that history and take that into account in our current day practices, because it has shaped what we do and how people think about us. Specific ways this moves is first through bias in terms of who is even let into the room. Bias has a huge factor in every step in the advancement of medical professionals. And it also has an effect on patient care. It also influences the culture, just what are considered the norms of how we act every day. It influences clinical care in terms of, again, how patients are treated, but also how medical professionals are treated by patients and how hospital systems respond to potentially anything from microaggressions to blatant discrimination. It influences our research funding systems, the types of research that we privilege, that we consider more quote unquote cutting edge, also has a racialized component. And from there, all of these things go on to impact promotion and tenure and who ends up in leadership. And I point out this cycle because a lot of times we think about making interventions in one site or another, and that's good and that's necessary, but without making interventions at all of these sites, the cycle of oppression will continue to reinforce itself. So I'm going to say a little bit about the histories of medical research. There is such a long and frankly really disturbing history of the role that Black people have been subject to in medical research. Many of us know about the Tuskegee experiments when Black men who had syphilis were not allowed to access treatment so that medical researchers could watch the degradation of their bodies from this disease. The field of gynecology is based on the work of J. Marion Sims, who experimented on Black women slaves in really horrific manners for the benefit of white women. There have been radiation experiments. There has been research on Black prisoners done in highly coercive or non-consensual environments and that have been detrimental to their health and well-being. There's been research done on Black youth in similar conditions, and really disturbingly, research to establish a connection between biology and violence. In other words, subjecting them to practices that are not to their benefit, in terms of their immediate health, but also in terms of of how they are seen socially, that reinforce ideas of racism. Really relevant to our current day moment, as recent as the late 80s, early 90s, Black and Hispanic babies were given an experimental vaccine at 500 times the regular dose, with disastrous consequences that researchers knew would already happen. So I bring that up just because there's a lot of focus on helping people to embrace the COVID vaccine, and I think that is very good and very important work, but histories like this need to be taken into account when that work is done. It's to point out that particularly within the Black community, worries and concerns about new vaccines are potentially very well founded. And there's also been an overrepresentation of Blacks in testing risky medical devices. Many of us know the story of Henrietta Lacks, whose cells were used to start a stem line that, without her knowledge or her family's knowledge, great medical insights have come from that, and also great profit, none of which she or her communities have seen. That's another large theme to consider in medical research, is who benefits. When California originally proposed a stem cell tax, Ruha Benjamin documented how many Black communities questioned why their money should be spent on medical advances that their communities would not necessarily have access to. So to sum this up, I'll share a tweet by Dr. Danny L. She proposes, is it Black people don't trust medicine, or is it that the US medical system has a history of disrespecting, disregarding, and losing the trust of the Black community? So now I'm going to turn to bias. The foundations of modern medicine, again, are really founded in bias. Modern medicine explicitly excluded Black medical schools, as well as other populations, from entering their institutions. And this bias has continued to exist in more subtle forms in virtually all areas of academic medicine. We see it in representation. It occurs in admissions, in hiring, in salaries, in rank, and in funding opportunities. I'm going to talk about one very specific example, though I'm sure that we could talk all day about other examples, and there's a lot of research to document this. One study on medical student performance evaluations found that outstanding, exceptional, and best were used most to describe white applicants, and kind, caring, and empathetic was used most to describe women. Competent was the word that was most used for Black applicants. And so the researchers thought, well, let's see what people really mean by competent. And when they did this deeper dig, they found that competent had a positive connotation 60% of the time when referring to Asian American applicants, 57% of the time when referring to white applicants, and only as in contrast to 37% of the time for Blacks and 33% of the time for Hispanics. So we see that even a seemingly neutral word like competent, the context in which it was used was still very much not working for the benefit of Black and Hispanic medical students. And I'll offer this tweet by Kira Tolis, a professional here at UC Davis in emergency medicine. She says, I remember having horrifically tokenizing medical school and residency interviews as a Black queer woman. This should be required reading for any faculty involved in admissions selection for their program. And this is an article that was in the New England Journal of Medicine called Interviewed While Black. I want to highlight this as a great article, but it also points towards another issue of equity, which is that this article it does require access to the journal. Much of this great research, some of which I'll share, is behind a paywall. That which is not behind a paywall, we will be sharing in the chat. And I also will be sharing a list with all of you at the end of this that has all of the resources I'm citing, including much other supplementary material. So now I'm turning to workplace culture. Just as biases is absolutely a part of this, when we talk about workplace culture, again, we're talking about the norms of academic medicine that are based in a culture of privilege. These are the expectations, the unwritten rules, how to act, who does what you expect them to look like. It extends to sociality. And here I'm going to turn it over to Aaron here in a minute, as you know, he's very familiar with this research, but here you can see just a list of some of the challenges to Black residents. Aaron?
Good afternoon. As Dr. McCollum mentioned, I formerly have had the opportunity to study microaggressions for the last year as a graduate student at Betty Irene Moore School of Nursing. In addition to being a content expert, I've experienced the same challenges of Black residents while navigating a career in healthcare. I began my nursing career as a year after the murder of Trayvon Martin and 6 months before his trial. So my experience of the mundane chatters of the nurses' stations that soon fell to whispers in my presence. As the trial progressed, I quickly found myself being the sole Black voice. I envied the other new grads on my unit as they were able to come into work every day, ready to learn, and I entered needing to learn, but also being in defense. It's times such as these when I'm looked upon as the Black ambassador. It adds an added stress on my ability to learn and my ability to care for patients. It's been widely studied in research and literature, but there's an added, almost like a post-traumatic stress involved in such conversations, questioning your approach, whether you should have more or said less. The experience of microaggressions are very similar, where often the recipient of microaggressions, the fear of speaking up against an issue or inappropriate comment, and being seen as possibly overreacting or being extra sensitive. So this is really added stress at a time when you're supposed to build relationships and expected to perform and learn in a new environment.
Thank you, Aaron. Really appreciate those insights and sharing your personal experience. Now I'm going to talk about an extension of this, really, which is clinical care. Microaggressions, bias, and just, really significant cultural differences can be a problem in the clinical care setting. There are documented differentials based on race that extend to how medical staff are treated by patients, and how hospitals are addressing this. So this is about how patients are treated by medical professionals, but it's also about how medical staff are treated by patients. And I understand that this is particularly a difficult and insidious problem in our current moment. I put up here just a quote by a research study by Cooper that is calling for, I'll read it out loud, and then I'm going to turn it over to Florice to share some of her expertise. Health professionals who experience biased treatment from patients should not have to tolerate it alone or struggle to decide how to respond without support from the entire organization. Physicians and healthcare institutions must remain committed to the welfare of patients. However, when anyone, including a patient, exhibits biased and disrespectful behavior, science is not golden. It is tacit approval. We all have the responsibility to speak and act. Florice?
Hi, everyone. Welcome. As I was kind of thinking about this today, there were several things that came to mind. One of the things is in my career, I had the opportunity to teach a lot of classes for cardiac bypass surgery patients. And I got to thinking about that this morning, and I thought to myself, out of all those classes that I was teaching about heart disease and high blood pressure and diabetes, how many Black patients did I really have out of hundreds every day that I saw? And I really could only honestly think about there was one Black male through those classes with me from week to week of hundreds of patients. So I thought that was very, I just gave that some thought. At the moment in time, of course, back in the 90s, I hadn't really thought about it, but now today with this work that we're doing, those type of things come to light because in your career, you kind of move from day to day and not even recognize those type of things, right? I also looked up, there are, back to that, you know, there's still 7 common health concerns among African Americans that we should be doing the work and monitoring still. Several health disparities exist between African Americans and white Americans. Doctors are seeing diseases that you expect to see in older patients, like heart disease and diabetes and stroke. We're seeing them now in relatively young African Americans. While genetics do play a role in certain instances, social economic factors have a significant impact on how African Americans are able to prevent and treat certain conditions. And so how do we, the question is, of course, one of the questions today is, how do we reverse this trend, right, that we've seen for decades? The other thing I did, I went a little deeper dive, of course, being in the neurosciences world for UC Davis. And I found that just looking up under that umbrella of diseases, the Black and Hispanic people are less likely to see a neurologist in the office as an outpatient than white people in the United States. And this is according to a study published in May 17 of 2017 in the neurology, the American Academic of Neurology. Black people with neurological conditions such as Parkinson's disease and stroke were more likely to be cared for in the hospital emergency department and had more hospital stays than white. And this is, like I said, just as of 2017. Black participants were nearly 30% less likely to see an outpatient neurologist relative to their white counterparts, even after adjustment for demographics, insurance, and health status differences. Hispanic participants were 40% less likely to see an outpatient neurologist. And among participants with known neurological conditions, Blacks were more likely to be cared for in the emergency department and to have more hospital stays and to have higher per capita inpatient than their counterparts. Yet no nationwide studies have examined these disparities in the use of neurological care for people with a broad range of neurological conditions. And that's just, I'm just speaking of the neurology world. So you can imagine this is probably, if you look up any journal article for any of the diseases, we would find these disparities. In my own career of 30 years, we were saying earlier that you as a health professional, if you're a nurse or a doctor or in the health world, you as a Black person or person of color, you experience things that you just experience them every day and you don't even say anything about them. I remember in my first 3 years of nursing, I walked into a white male's room to introduce myself as his nurse, and he instead called me the N-word and told me that I would not be his nurse for the night. Those are the type of things I kept to myself and didn't ever say anything except ask the charge nurse to be reassigned to a different patient, right? So these are the type of things that do take place. and in my experience over the 30 years, I also, in thinking about today, you know, early on, I just didn't see any Black physicians at all throughout my career until I would say the past 10 years of actually being able to work with and work beside Black doctors and physicians. Residents, I would say, have come in. You know, I shouldn't, when I walk through the hospital or all of a sudden I'm introduced to a new resident and they're a person of color or Black, I shouldn't be excited, right? But but I actually, as a person of color and a Black person, I actually get excited to this day every time we have new residents come in and I see new female Black residents or male is exciting to me to have that in the hospital and among the staff. Recently, also just in my own, I had to come to terms with this, which was really incredible. I had interviewed an employee who was going to be coming to work for me, and I hadn't seen this person in person. They flew in. I'm standing in the lobby in the pavilion, and because of the name alone and the resume, I was looking for a young blonde with blue eyes, tall, thin, Caucasian gal, just alone based on the name and the resume and the credentials. And actually, it was a Black female that I was about to hire. So I had to tell myself, shame on you, you know, because being integrated into that, you know, shame on me to even have assumed, according to the paper that I had in front of me, that this was not a Black female who had earned this right and earned this status of a manager, a nurse manager. So these are the things that I'm excited to be part of this, just coming together and being part of this movement and these taking place with this work. So once again, you know, the question is, how do we reverse this trend? And we all need to get on board and do this hard work together today and try to reverse some of this. So that was some of the things that I had to share with the group on this subject. We need to make sure that our Black students and medical students who are coming into the academic setting and the medical center, that when they're studying in the library as a group and supporting each other, that the police, the UC Davis police, are not called and they are not, the bathrooms are not blocked and they're not asked to leave. Those things need to change. Thank you.
Thank you, Flores, for sharing some really powerful stories with us here that I think we all need to hear and know about. Before moving on to the next point, I'm going to start launching some polls as I talk. The first poll's popping up now. You see that and the first question I'm going to be asking is, how well do you know the history of racism in your field? I'm going to leave this up for about 45 seconds, and I'll be sharing the results of this at that point. And while you're filling this out, I'm going to get ready to move on to the next and the last major area we'll be talking about today, which is research funding. One thing that we know is that Black medical researchers are underfunded. And there's a lot of potential variables as to why that is happening that many people have been exploring and identifying. But before I tell you more about that, I'll take a pause here. So, you know, just to kind of reflect back to you all what we see here when we ask you, how well do you know the history of racism in your field? It looks like the majority are saying, you know, some, with a smaller minority either saying you don't know much about it or you know a lot. And this is just more of like us taking the temperature. We'll go ahead and launch the second one now as we, as I continue on. This one is going to be asking you if you've examined your own implicit biases. So again, now returning to the question of why are Black medical researchers underfunded? I'm going to point us towards something that points towards a bias, not so much in individuals, but in terms of what research we actually think matters the most. What you see here are probably some pretty confusing looking word clouds. And so I'm going to kind of walk you through this and then let Dr. Michelle Coe talk a bit more about this issue. We'll close this current poll in about like 20 seconds. So what you see under A are word cloud topics of the types of research that Black researchers submitted to the NIH. And what you see under B are research topic word clouds that reflect, that had no Black researchers apply to them. Sorry, this is a bit cumbersome to explain. But sorry about that. But to slow this down, if you look at A, you see words like intervention pop out big in multiple different places. You see the word patient, you see treatment, outcome, child. These are the types of research that are directly applicable to patient-focused interventions that are attending to disease prevention and intervention. This is the type of research that Black researchers tend to do, it seems, more than other topics. And those numbers that you see next to them, the say 29 is how many topics were submitted under that cluster, and the percentage after it, so like 17.2 is the acceptance rate. And so when we look at this, what we see is that word clouds A had overall lower acceptance rates than word clouds B. Word clouds B, again, are topics that had no Black researchers apply for grants under. And so sure, we can look at this two different ways. We can say, oh, we need to get Black researchers more interested in these hot topics like neurons and corneal and iron mechanisms and whatnot. And that's great, sure. But this also shows us that perhaps we are also undervaluing research that is focused on health disparities, that is focused on patient interventions, that is focused on disease prevention. And that there's probably a reason that these topics are of great interest to Black researchers. So we have a double bias here. There are racial biases that Black researchers are facing, and there are biases in terms of just the very topic they are picking are making them less likely to be funded by the NIH. And I'll add that literally a couple days ago, a call came out citing this exact study, asking the NIH why they haven't done more. And I'll be including that in the resources link I'm sharing at the end. Now, Michelle, I'd love to hear you tell us a bit more about your experience.
Why haven't they done more? I think what I wanted to talk about was, I think many of you have heard about the concept of the ordinariness of racism. That, racism is embedded in the fabric of society. And what that means is that racism is pervasive in every step, every facet of the research enterprise as well, and as every opportunity for anti-Blackness to show up. Today I have a couple stories, just really a fraction of what I've experienced myself or witnessed, to give concrete examples of what this looks like in research. And I say this, like Dr. McCullough, to affirm what you can tell from, you may be able to tell, is I'm not saying this as having lived experience as a Black researcher. So I just want to present this as these are my perspectives as an observer and someone who's watched this happen over time. And I feel like so I'm going to talk about what I think of are sort of the microaggressions of research, but that I think really have macro consequences. So the first one I want to call is, I think of it as the all lives matter response in research review. It's just when you submit a grant application, a research manuscript, or a protocol, and the response from reviewers is, and this has happened to me multiple times, as well as colleagues. I will try to speak up a bit. I apologize. I do have some internet connection issues. The response I have seen many times over, I'd say 15 years is, why is this only about Black people? What about other populations? Whether or not we have put in a literature review, a theoretical framework, laid out all the evidence for the disproportionate impact of something, particular issue on Black communities. So just for an example, within the last 3 years, I've submitted multiple grant applications about that I want to look at the experiences of women of color within Medi-Cal and Medicaid. And one of the review criticisms I've received is, I don't understand why women of color would have a different experience in healthcare than, white women, or it was phrased as all women. I had a colleague, we submitted a paper and a manuscript reviewer wrote back, it was about the impact of hospital closures on Black communities in the South. And one of the reviewers wrote back and said, I don't understand why this is about Black communities. You should be looking at other communities too, like Hispanic communities and so on. And thirdly, I have a study currently unable to move forward because the external IRB, one of their initial criticisms was, again, I don't understand why, I'm paraphrasing here, this is about Black communities, despite it being a lengthy study about the impacts of disproportionate policing on health outcomes. And we cannot actually move forward. So that's a couple stories for one, what I call this, when in research, in review, the all lives matter argument is pulled out. The second example I think of that happens in research is what I call double or triple scrutiny that happens to Black research and research on Black communities and patients. And the example that came to mind for that was, I had a colleague who was on a team that published a study very recently in the last year about effects of racial concordance and Black infant mortality. And then I watched, in real time as there was an incredible amount of criticism and questioning leveled at this study. And it really stands out because it was at a level that is not seen from most studies in my own field, which looks at healthcare delivery and the way healthcare services is done. It stood out because it was actually one in the line of a large body of research on racial concordance. And it, again, outsized for, I think, what it was about. And in the form of scrutiny, this will extend beyond what we see behind the scenes in terms of manuscript reviews or grant reviews, but really also public, whether it was social media, whether it was op-eds. In particular, the last piece that really made it a clear case, I think, of anti-Blackness in research is the criticism was primarily leveled at the one Black woman on the research team, who was not the lead author of the study, and nevertheless was the one who received all the questioning of, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? These are the flaws in your study. And so I think it's really important to understand that anti-Blackness shows up under the guise of presumed scientific neutrality. And we really need to remember that no one's neutral. And it's important to say that this kind of study, I think for a lot of physicians, made people uncomfortable. And we need to sit with that discomfort instead of thinking, okay, people need to hear my feedback. And then the first two examples really bring me to the third, which is this presumption of expertise. That the feedback that I have seen, that I'm calling all lives matter and double scrutiny, they're frequently fielded by researchers with little or to no expertise in the study topic at hand. Again, leveled at Black researchers in particularly, and studies on Black health. There's the underlevel of criticism comes from people with no background in the field. Again, I saw this happen with this particular study. I'm a professor in health policy. I would not say, oh, it's my duty to go and criticize my colleague's research in orthopedic surgery. And I don't see that type of reservation being reserved, or that type of respect being reserved for our Black colleagues. So for example, again, going back to this racial concordance study, I saw many physicians offer takes on this, and they had no research background in critical race theory, patient-provider interactions, or even understanding that there's already a longstanding research done on this field, on health workforce, or having an understanding of basic econometric methods. And I think that's another area where we have to think about it. Why do we feel comfortable bringing forth our opinions when we lack expertise? It is a level of respect, and why do we think that we feel more free to do this when researchers are Black or the topic is on Black patient populations? And I will say this is, I mean, I have done this myself. I have, for example, as a physician, you know, done this with respect to nursing research. I have been in conversations where I think, oh, I should bring out my ideas and opinions, when really I know nothing about research in nursing. I certainly don't know what it's like to have the lived experience of being a nurse or being a Black nurse. And I need to, you know, it's upon me to really check myself and think and recheck my own humility. And to understand that then this happens, and these inclinations I think of as quote unquote microaggressions in research, but when they show up in everything we do, reviewing a grant, reviewing a research manuscript, reviewing an IRB protocol, writing a private or public commentary, we have to think about how it's everywhere. We have to think about really critically viewing every single step of the way where it's showing up. I think the effort that it takes to weather this takes a lot of energy, and it distracts our colleagues from their work and doing important research. And I just want to, sorry, I'm going over, but I just want to say that, you know, research culture teaches us that rejection is part of the professional experience. We're supposed to tough it out and show persistence. But I think, to me, the cumulative consequence of all this is really, instead, we reinforce the message that Black researchers, research on Black communities is not worthy of our time, our effort, or our money. And so I hope in our breakout rooms, we think very specifically and, you know, in very concrete ways, you know, where have you seen this happen? And then kind of what steps can we take to change this?
Thank you, Michelle. I really appreciate the eloquence with which you describe that this happens at multiple different levels of the research process. I have one poll that I'm going to close in about 10 seconds here on asking the question, how comfortable do you feel addressing discriminatory behavior? And after that, I'll be launching one last poll as I talk a bit about what we'll be doing in the discussion breakout groups, which is our next agenda item. I'm closing this poll. And I'll share these results. We see here that the majority of us are not comfortable, but still try to intervene. And I really appreciate that, as I think that really falls in line with what Dr. Ko is talking about, that, you know, this raises that these conversations don't make us comfortable, but doing the right thing is still necessary. Okay, now I'm going to launch our fourth and final poll, asking how familiar are you with research on health and racial disparities in your field? And while that is going, I'm going to begin to talk about how we're going to be moving through our discussion. So I would ask you, as small groups, to think about very broadly the questions of, like, what are the problems and what are the solutions? Obviously, we have covered an immense amount of real estate here, and I wouldn't expect any one group to talk about all of these different things. What we want the groups to be is a time for people to share their expertise, to share what they see as the challenges, and to dialogue, likely with people coming from very different places than you, given the real diversity that we saw in the registration, both racial diversity, but also in terms of one's relationship to the system of academic medicine. So specifically, we'd like you to think about, one, what are the problems that need to be addressed at UC Davis Health? if you are part of the UC Davis health system. If you're not, if you're outside of it, you can speak, either as an outsider to the UC Davis health system, or to your own experience with other healthcare systems. And we also invite you to think about, where does anti-Blackness surface in academic medicine? And once you've had some time talking about that, we'll ask you to move on to solutions. Before I talk about that, I'm going to go ahead and end this poll and share those results with you all. Here we see a similar trend of what we've seen with others, with most people having some familiarity with health and racial disparities in their field, which is great, and so much more that we can do and learn. And this can be, the next step in that process. Moving on to the solutions, we ask you to think about what is already happening to help address these problems. It's always good to notice, like, what are our current resources, and what do we have to build on? And then secondly, we ask you to think, like, what more is needed? What other things can we be doing at any level? This could be the individual level. It could be, say, like at a departmental or organizational level. It could be at an institutional level. What do we want to be asking our leadership for? I'll remind you all that as we move into these, the expectations are to be respectful of each other. The expectations are to remember our grounding assumptions, that we're not going to be discussing if anti-Blackness exists. We're going to be talking about how it exists. Each room should have a facilitator. They will be, after this, sharing out very high-level notes, all anonymous, and the point of those is to help us learn from the collective wisdom in these rooms. And I will be I will be sharing the results of that with you all in a written piece down the road. We ask you to please remember what breakout room number you are in case you have any technical issues. So if you come back in, we know where to put you. With that, and finally, if you do need to leave before the breakout sessions begin, we understand and really appreciate the time you have spent with us. So with this, I think we are ready to move into the breakout rooms. We have put the discussion questions in the chat, so you should be able to see them as you move into those rooms.
You should all be receiving an invitation in the next couple of moments.
Oh, and somebody asked how much time you have. That's a great question. You'll have 20 minutes in your breakout rooms.
Also, someone asked if they could participate only with chat because they don't have a microphone. And so yes, as long as you're participating, please put your comments in the chat when you break out.
Okay, I'm going to send the invitations now.
anyone here who is having an issue with getting into breakout rooms, just go ahead and either put it in the chat or let us know.
Shasid, are you able to accept the invitation to join a breakout room?
Jacob Flores, you were assigned a room. You can go ahead and accept the invitation. Yeah. Can we move them into the breakout room?
I can't force them.
Okay.
Yeah, we need to accept the invitation.
Yeah, if any of you who are still here, if you don't want to participate in the breakout rooms, that's totally fine. I can share out what we'll be saying at the end if you want to, leave the webinar after this. Essentially, we'll be asking you, we're essentially asking you to watch for further ways that you can continue this work, continue these conversations. We're offering you 2 resources from our organizations, one from my office at the Feminist Research Institute, and also from the Health Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Office within UC Davis Health. And that's what we got.
Thanks, Sarah.
I will be right back. I need to go visit a room.
Yeah.
Yep. Anindita, is everything going okay? Oh, let me unmute you, or I'll ask you to unmute.
Hi, yeah, I'm in breakout room 10, and there aren't any participants. There's one participant who has to leave.
Oh. Okay, let me see if I can move you to another room, okay?
Sure. And would you mind moving that participant as well? She said that she could stay for a little bit, but would have to leave in 5 minutes.
Okay, let me see.
Thanks.
Yeah, you got you got all the people who left, it looks like. Okay, so let me find you. You said you're in 10?
Yes.
Yeah.
I see. Okay. So I'll move you to room, how about room 5? Room 9. Oops. No, sorry. Suddenly it changed.
Victoria.
Okay.
Unmute yourself, Victoria.
A bunch of the people from one of the breakout rooms left, so it's just 2 folks, and they were like, "Can you move us to another room?" So I'm merging them into the room. A bunch of people dropped off all as soon as you said breakout rooms.
They laughed.
They're like, "Bye." That's fine. Okay, so Dr. Walker, I'll move her too. I'm moving. Somebody came in and said the same thing, so I'm gonna move them.
Yeah, so I just moved everyone. So now we have some small groups, but no one with just 2 people. That was just 2 people because everyone else
left. Okay.
Looks like room 12 has 2 people.
Yeah, so I'm going to merge them. Let's see. $15, 215.
Let me know whenever I'm good to click the join breakout.
Yeah, you can go ahead. You're good.
Thank you.
Anindita. Yeah.
Great. So I'm going to just make some of the groups a little bit bigger.
Okay. So room 13 only has 2 people?
Yeah, moving into room 9.
Thank you.
Oh, I just moved some people to room 9.
Oh,
Okay.
But that's fine. I moved Anandita and Dr. Valencia Walker into there.
okay.
Elizabeth has a message. She just hasn't joined, but it's been sent for her to move.
Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna go. They're probably like, where are we going?
I can broadcast a message to all of them and say, please request help if your group is too small and you would like to be merged with another group.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like they're all, I mean, one's 3, but that's probably okay.
Yeah, Marcus, Aaron, actually. Yeah, I saw that.
Or 2, there's 2 that have 3 people, but.
Chelsea in the chat is saying she's still waiting to be given a room.
Let's see.
Chelsea Carney, thank you, Chelsea.
And Unazir?
Yes,
well?
I'm moving them. Okay. Chelsea, did you get an invitation? Not yet.
Not yet.
I'll try to resend it. All right. Did you get that? Perfect.
April Sanders just direct messaged me that she joined late, but I don't see her. Maybe you already put her in one.
She's not unassigned, so I can't move. Oh, okay. I have a Lillian. I'm gonna go ahead and put them in a room.
Let me see I'll ask April if she got assigned.
Okay.
Oh, she must be because I can't message her anymore. So, I mean, she's in a room.
Unfortunately, one of our facilitators messaged at 12:55 saying that he had to leave. So I had to regroup a little bit. So we had one less facilitator at the end.
Wow. I feel like you've done magic today.
I don't know how it worked, but I hope that all the people that are still in this room are here by choice and not because they can't get into the room.
It seems like it.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah. Yeah, we just lost the one.
You've assigned folks, but they just haven't accepted.
Yeah.
Yeah, now everyone seems like, I think it's just us now.
We still have Torres here.
Elizabeth, Maria.
Oh, I see. I see now. Yeah, we still have some folks. Sorry, I forgot to click over. Oh yeah, we got a whole bunch of people. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
And then the facilitators were invited to join a room. They didn't have to accept, but I think all of them did because I don't see them in our main room.
Yeah, I think we're good on them. And it looks like I'm kind of glancing through. It looks like every room has a facilitator.
Yes, that I tried to make sure of.
Can you move me into room 26?
Of course.
It's only 3 people and they're all.
Just sent you an invite, Mercedes.
Oh, she's.
George, were you previously in a room?
I won't. Basically, the last slide I was going to is a call to action. So we've had some wonderful discussions here, and discussion is great. And I think discussion is an action, but it's not the only action. We also need like tangible change. So I invite you all to think about what future actions you can take after this. This might mean specific practices you as an individual want to undertake, something that intervention you'd like to do within your sphere of influence, putting pressure on people, in spaces of more sort of higher up in the hierarchy, so to speak, further education, further trainings. One thing that we want to offer is to just continue to watch the programming that will be continuing to occur through both the UC Davis Health Office of Health Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And we're going to go ahead and put the link to their website. And we also invite you to watch for future offerings through the Feminist Research Institute, where I'm at. And you also will be receiving, some follow-up emails, and so you can watch those for more opportunities. And finally, let me get these. Maria, would you mind putting the links up for both of our websites? That would be wonderful. Thank you. And the last thing that we would love to ask you all is just for a little bit of feedback. We'd love to hear about what you thought of this session, what you learned. There's a short survey that just popped up into the chat. So please feel encouraged to fill that out as well. If anyone has any final thoughts, please put them in the chat, and we'd love to hear them. Mercedes, do you have any parting thoughts that you would like to offer this wonderful group?
Yes, thank you to my panelists and all of the facilitators to make this important session happen as we're moving forward into 2021. We've been in the information age for a long, long time, folks. And so it's not enough to just know the information. It's now time to know how and move forward in action with the information. And so this is why it's so critical for us to be in community. So much of the tactics of oppression is to keep us separated, keep us siloed. And so even as well as we do the work, and we have a lot of areas to grow as UC Davis and UC Davis Health, we're working to eradicate a lot of those silos and get us into community. That's why we will always host these sessions, but to make sure that we come in together and stronger, because we're going to do this work together. Sarah?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, and again, yes, and I want to reinforce thank you to the presenters and the facilitators. Some of the facilitators will be sharing, as I said, their sort of very high level anonymized notes, and I will be doing a write-up of that so that you all can learn what the collective wisdom of this whole group was, which I think will be really exciting to see in a few weeks. So thank you so much. With that, we will bid you a good rest of your day.
Bye-bye, everyone. We'll see you at the next session.